Propaganda used to be a subtle art. It used to be that when you wanted to create propaganda, you subtly changed the truth to make subtle and very minute changes to someone's perception, in so doing pushing them towards what you want. Slowly and surely, by degrees, you'd try to take them from a perception of reality which was accurate to something that was inaccurate. That was how it used to be when they wanted to talk to you about how totally there were no communists in Hollywood or in the government. Certainly, no communists would ever be there. Or when they were trying to convince you that the sexual revolution was a good idea back in the 60s, the leftists were very good at convincing you of very subtle untruths, such as the idea that it is consensual, thus it is not bad and has no dire effects on the people doing it. Or whether it be, or there must be no communists in Hollywood because none of them will admit it when we actually ask them. Or it's an attack on free speech when you ask someone whether they're a communist or not. That sort of thing. Very subtle untruths were happening then. But that cannot be said of today, because as the propaganda has been pushed further, and as it has gotten less and less acquainted with the reality of, well, reality, it has gone from subtle manipulations to out-and-out fabrications of total realities that has nothing to do with what's actually going on. And none of this can be ever more succinctly categorized and shown for what it is than with the White House going to TikTok influencers to give out their government-mandated narrative when it comes to the gas prices and inflation that has been skyrocketing over the past months, of which the administration has much blame for. They have convinced these TikTok influencers, which of course is not particularly offensive, since they are, of course, brain dead, that the gas prices had nothing to do with the administration's policies on oil and the prevention of new leases on federal lands, and instead has a whole lot to do with the Russia situation that has been going on for a few weeks at this point, and we haven't gotten new numbers for. Or it has to do with very slight decreases in gas consumption that were going on during the pandemic, which, to put it into perspective, was in 2020, there was 1.3% less gas consumed in the US than there was in 2019. Certainly a decrease, and when you're talking about how much oil the US uses, not an insubstantial amount of it, but 1.3% does not justify a 300% increase in gas prices. Certainly not the $7 that you're seeing over in clown states like California. And, oh boy, that was obvious to everyone. No one was convinced by this stupid TikTok influencer that the gas prices had nothing to do with the Biden administration. If anything, I think this turns off more people to the idea because, well, it's just so obvious and blatant. Like I said, propaganda is supposed to be subtle. This is not it, guys, but though I say that, when I'm talking about propaganda being subtle, I'm really talking about American propaganda, because if you look at the broader scale of other places, propaganda isn't necessarily so. Just take, for instance, the USSR, whose propaganda was so eye-bleedingly obvious that they had a whole saying explaining exactly how much the citizenry understood that their government was lying to them, and how the government knew that the citizenry knew that they were lying to them. It was a whole thing over there, and yet those lies continued on for years and years, and was even believed by many in the Americas who were blinded by many of the things that were coming out of the USSR. All very carefully curated, mind you, but things that were coming out nonetheless. And, of course, all of it complete lies. This sort of propaganda is now what is going on in the US, though I will say it has not taken as much hold as it did in the USSR, because many people in the US have cottoned on to the nonsense. Because, in reality, while some people may think that many people believe these propagandistic lies that are coming out of the Biden administration when it comes to things like gas prices or the COVID-19 pandemic, which I won't even get into here because YouTube, no one actually is. And That's not even the purpose of it. The purpose of this sort of propaganda is not to convince you of anything. It's not even to convince other people of anything. No matter how stupid people are, they're not so stupid and have so little memory space that they are willing to ignore the past year and pretend as though all of the gas prices problems came into existence within the last 15 seconds. No. It's designed to convince you that you are in the minority, or better yet, that you're alone in understanding that all of this is utter lies. It's all to convince you that you are the minority, that no one believes what you're saying and no one can see the reality, when in fact, many people do. That's why Biden is such a deeply unpopular president nowadays. It's because everyone sees through it. No matter how much he tries to pretend that he is a popular president who has political capital behind him and can go for gold in spending bills or other such proposals like taking over the entire election system on the federal level, no matter how much he tries to convince you that he believes that he is that, he's not. He is not a popular president. The gas prices do have something to do with what Biden has done in the oil industry, and basically everyone understands this, on at least some level. Now, of course, some people are just delusional leftists and will believe anything that comes out of Biden's mouth. Just take, and it really says something that even Elon Musk is now pointing out, that these people are in fact NPCs and have no cognizant thought whatsoever. But that's a very small group of people, and it's a dwindling one, because the more people walk outside the pasture and actually go out and touch grass and see the reality around them, well, those people aren't going back in. Very few, at the very least. And many more people are coming out if there's any backflow at all. There is no inflow to the Biden camp, is the point. And there's no inflow to the agreeing with the propagandistic lies of the mainstream media either. They aren't growing, they're only shrinking. And so, it must be said that this propaganda is only to convince you that you are alone, and that there is no hope that they can push out and out lies and still be believed. And I would say the same goes not just on the economic spectrum, but also on the social spectrum. Just take, for instance, the constant and completely insane sorts of news that we get out of the school system. Lots of people in those areas try to pretend that what the teachers are doing in those situations is very popular, and that it's just only a minority of terroristic parents who care about their kids being groomed. But in reality, most parents do not like that their children are being talked about things which, well, I can't talk about on YouTube because, well, it's not appropriate. It's not even appropriate for many adults, I would say. And yet, that's what they still try to convince you. They try to convince you that you're alone. They do the same thing with CRT. That's why they're being so smug about there being no argument, or that everyone can see the reality of the complete fantasy that they've constructed. That's why they try to do that, because they have no other options. They only have to convince you that not to fight. That's the way they win. Otherwise, reality will come and assert itself, because it has to. You can't live in a fantasy for very long before the reality is going to just crash in on you. The same way you can't live under a house of sticks, and structurally incoherent sticks, I might add, before it comes crashing in on the first gust of wind. That's the same thing with this propaganda, but if you go in and reinforce the walls yourself by standing under it with your head against the ceiling, well, maybe it will last a bit longer, and that is what you should not do. And that's also where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do subscribe down below and check me out on other platforms. I'm on BitChute, I'm on Brighteon, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, and all of those links are down in the description. I suggest you go check them out. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily. Don't be square.